this computer. So there's going to be some terminology when we're talking about England that may be a little confusing. If you look on page 201, the map, we're going to be doing that map next week. You'll see that England is only a part of the land. What color is England in our map on page 201? Maya?
Green.
It's green. So England is actually only part of the island. The one island is made up of England, Wales, and Scotland. Scotland is where I am from. And they don't like each other. If you went up to a Welsh person and was like, hey, you're English, they don't like that. It's like if you went to a person who was from Mexico and been like, hey, you're Colombian. Like, no, I'm not. I'm Mexican. They're different countries. They have different cultures. And so England has been the country that's kind of the biggest and the strongest and the richest on the island, but they're made up of different. Scotland and England fought for hundreds of years. So you're going to need to know those different islands or the different countries on the island. There's England, Wales, Scotland, and then on Ireland, there's North Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Everybody with me so far? Please give me a thumbs up if you're with me. All right. So when we're talking about England, we're only talking about that green country. If I say Great Britain, I'm talking about England, Wales, and Scotland, that big island. Everybody still with me? If I say the United Kingdom, that means England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Does that make sense, kind of? You can think of it kind of like America. When America was first founded, did it include California? No. It grew with time as one part took over other parts. All right, so please turn to page 200, and we're going to talk about the foundation of England. So we have been talking about what empire for the last 2 chapters. What empire have we been talking about forever? We wrote paragraphs on it. Yeah, Kezia?
Rome.
We've been talking about Rome. Now, when Rome falls apart, does the whole empire fall apart or just part of it? And if it's just part, which part of Rome falls apart? Does anybody remember? Noah?
The western.
The western part. What is the eastern part called, Noah? Do you remember? Starts with a B. That's all right. Does anybody remember?
I forgot.
That's all right. We've been at it. It's called the Byzantine Empire. But the western half falls apart. Does anybody remember the type of tribes that invade and take over after the fall of Western Rome? Aaron?
It was German tribes.
Germanic tribes, which is why English is more closely related to German than it is to Italian. Italian, French, and Spanish all come from Latin, and English comes from German. Now, the German tribes that wreck Western Europe found 2 major countries. The Franks found France, and the Angles found Angleland, which becomes known as England. And so they are the very first people that we would call English, and they take over the island. And that's how things go for hundreds of years. Hey, Matthew, he's still holding something up. There we go. So the Angles found England, and they have a mighty king named Alfred the Great. So on page 200, you will see a picture of Alfred. Now, Alfred is called the Great because he does something extremely important. He defeats the Vikings. Now, the Vikings, you probably have all heard of. Where have we heard of Vikings before? Where have you guys heard Vikings before? Have you heard of Vikings or certain Vikings or Viking people? Lucy?
I heard of Viking stories from Scandinavia.
What's that? Can you say that one more time? I lost you.
I've heard of Viking stories in Scandinavia.
Yeah? Do you know any of them off the top of your head?
Oh,
Dude, it's okay. You don't have to.
I don't.
Okay. But, you've heard it from sports teams and such. Xavier? You've muted yourself, bro. I'll do the muting and unmuting.
Okay. I'm just gonna go with a guess. Scotland.
Well, yeah, kind of. Well, we've heard of Vikings. People, when we think of Vikings, we think of dudes with horned hats like the Minnesota Vikings. We think of the pillaging and everything. And they did do a lot of that, but I'm going to give you a few Viking facts that are not myths based on movies and stuff. Number one, Vikings were not a people. Viking was a job. So just because you were from Norway or Scandinavia, like Lucy was saying, did not mean you were a Viking. A Viking was somebody who was going out to raid and pillage. So you'd be like, hey, where did Aaron and Cash go? Oh, they went Viking. Did that make sense? So a Viking was a person who would, it's like a pirate. Pirates aren't all English or French. A pirate is somebody who goes and steals from other people on the ocean. So Vikings started raiding everywhere, and they were a huge problem. They have infected our society even today. Does anybody know a very famous Viking from all of the Avengers movies? Cash?
Thor.
Thor is a Norse god, and the Norse people that went Viking would have prayed to Thor. And we name our days after the Norse or Viking gods. Thursday got its name from Thor because yesterday would have been the day of Thor or Thor's day. Today is actually Frida's day. Frida is the Norse god of life and the wilderness. And so it's Frida's day. Wednesday is Woden's day. But the Vikings were pillaging everywhere, and they invaded England and were taking it over. But luckily for the English, Alfred the Great managed to stop the Viking invasion, which is why he is called the Great. Everybody with me? All right, perfect. So Alfred the Great is important because he stopped the Viking invasion. Now, he exists hundreds of years before what we're going to be talking about right now. Now, English kingship, sorry, we're a little bit all over the place. It's hard for me to focus. English kingship is different than kingship in other parts of the country because English kings do not have absolute authority. England still has a queen today. Does anybody know who the Queen of England is today? Noah?
Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth II. We're going to be talking about Queen Elizabeth I to Monday. But Queen Elizabeth II can trace her line all the way back to Canute the Dane. They've had the same family ties all the way till today. But the Queen of England doesn't have much authority because English kings gave some of their authority away to a group called Parliament. Parliament is like our Congress. So you can think of England back in the day, Noah, as like instead of having a president and Congress, you would have the king and Parliament. The king was kind of the top guy, but the Parliament was made up of all of the lords, the Lord of Buckingham and Hertfordshire. And Parliament is created by a piece of paper called the Magna Carta. If you look on page 200, you'll see the word Magna Carta. And Magna Carta is Latin, and it means Great Charter. And the Magna Carta gives the English people certain rights. And they're proud of that because not every other king had signed a paper that gave people rights. If the president wanted to arrest Kaylee and throw her in jail and take all of her stuff, could the president of the United States do that?
No.
No. Could, if Kaylee was living in ancient Japan, could the emperor of Japan arrest her and take all of her stuff, do you think?
Yes.
Cash?
Yeah.
Yeah, could, because in America, we have rights. They didn't have rights back in feudal Japan. So in France, during the Middle Ages, the kings had absolute power. Remember we talked about absolute monarchy? But in England, they do not. They have constitutional monarchy. All right, so now we're going to get into the meat of it. We're going to talk about religion in England. Raise your hand. I don't see any of your screens hardly. Raise your hand if you remember the Protestant Reformation or you can raise your hand digitally. Does anybody remember the Protestant Reformation from your book or from any of those videos that I made? Martin Luther.
Oh.
Remember Martin Luther? He writes the 95 Theses. Now, does anybody remember what Martin Luther was protesting? What was he? So I guess we're not going to be talking about England today. We're going to talk about the Protestant Reformation. What was he protesting, Lucy? Unmute. Oh my God.
Oh,
Okay, go ahead, Lucy. Sorry.
Martin Luther, I believe it was the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
tried to get money from the people, and it wasn't for good causes, and I believe it was for themselves or something, like trying to tell them that they're going to like purgatory and places like that, or like things like areas that weren't true, and they would bend the rules. And then Martin Luther was protesting that, saying that it's not right and that they should stop.
Yeah, that's a pretty succinct way of saying it. So before Martin Luther, Constantine, who was the Roman guy, created one church. That was the Roman Catholic Church. And the word Catholic means universe. So there was only one church in all of Europe. So you couldn't be a Baptist or a Presbyterian. You were just Catholic. Everybody with me? But the Catholic Church was not like the church that you and I go to today. It was rich, it was powerful, and it was not very nice. And so if you're somebody like Maya or Noah and you want to go to heaven, well, today we know you just got to accept Jesus into your heart and try and be a good Christian. But if you were a Catholic back in the day, there were rules. You had to, number one, you had to be baptized. You had to go to confession. Does anybody remember what confession is? You guys ever heard of this? What's confession, Kezia? 1 second. What's confession, Kezia?
It's where a Catholic person goes to and confess their sins.
So imagine for a second, confession is you would have to go every week into church and meet with a priest and tell them all of the bad things you did. So you go into the confessional and he would say, I would say, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." And he'd be like, "What did you do, Mr. Frazier?" And I'd say, "Well, I was talking a bunch of junk behind Maya's back." And he'd be like, "Ooh, that's not good." And I had, impure thoughts one day. And they'd be like, "Ooh, that's not good." And I stole a candy bar from Kaylee. And they'd be like, "Oh, that's not good." And I was walking behind Cash and I kicked his foot so that he tripped and fell and scratched his face. And he'd be like, "Oh my gosh, Mr. Frazier, you did all of these bad things?" And then after I confessed, he would give me like punishments. "Okay, well, since you tripped Cash, you have to whip yourself 10 times. And since you were talking behind Maya's back, you have to say the Holy Mary 100 times, and because you stole, you have to wear an itchy shirt. So you had to like pay for each of your sins. And if you didn't pay for your sins, then you would go to a place called purgatory. Lucy was talking about it. Now, today, we think of when people die, you either go to heaven or you go to hell. But for Catholics, there was a place in the middle, and it was called purgatory. And let's say you were a Christian like Mr. Frazier, but you weren't a very good one. I never went to church. I was always talking behind Kaylee's back. I was taking science tests instead of listening to history lectures. And I was, cursing and doing all these bad things. When I died, I wouldn't go straight to heaven, even though I was a Christian. I would go to purgatory. And there I would be punished for my sins until I went to heaven. So let's say that I was a not very good Christian, but I didn't kill anybody. So then I would go to purgatory. Let's say that I was a liar. And so I'd go to purgatory, and then I would be tortured for 100 years. And then once I was done with 100 years, boom, then I go to heaven. Now, for Catholics, this was a big deal. So if you had some money and you didn't want to deal with all of that nonsense, you could buy what were called indulgences. An indulgence was a get out of jail free card. Any of you ever played Monopoly? And you land on Community Chest and you get a card that says get out of jail free. And then you land on the jail and you just use the card. So an indulgence was a piece of paper signed by the Pope that gave you forgiveness of sins. So let's say that I tripped Cash and he scratched his face and I was lying behind Maya's back and I stole $20 from Kezia and I told the priest this and he's like, oh, Mr. Frazier, dude, what's wrong with you? And he'd be like, you have to do all of these things. And I'd be like, how about this? And I give him my indulgence that I bought and he'd be like, okay, you're cool. You're square. Does everybody understand?
Yeah.
Is that the way that Christians should live?
No.
No. You could also, let's say that I was super mega rich. I'm not, but let's say I was. And I have a lazy son, and his name is Aiden. And he never does any of his homework, and he's just being lazy. And but I want him to be the pastor of a big church. You could pay money to the church, and they would make your son like the Bishop of Canterbury. And that was called simony. And so there were all of these things that Martin Luther was seeing the Catholic Church do that were not cool. And so he makes a list, 95 things. Indulgences, the priests are, stealing money from the congregation. They're using the money that the people are giving to the church, their tithes and offerings, they're using it to buy big houses and, be dripping with jewels and diamonds and gold, Noah. And so he writes a list of 95 things saying the church needs to fix this. Now, how do you think the Pope and the Catholic Church felt about this list of 95 things that they needed to fix? Let me go to Invisible Noah or Aaron. Go ahead, Aaron.
They felt that they really need to get this guy out of here because he's ruining our plan.
Yeah, and he's bringing to light of day all of the bad stuff that he was doing. If you found out all these bad things about me, and I have Noah who's telling the truth on me about all these bad things I'm doing, I can't have Noah do that because then people will find out. So I have to silence Martin Luther. So the Catholic Church sets up a special court called the Inquisition. And the Inquisition's job was to find bad Christians called heretics. Everybody still with me? And so let's say you were a Christian, but you disagreed with the Pope. And you said, no, people shouldn't have to, whip themselves for forgiveness. They should just be able to, pray for forgiveness to the Holy Spirit. Well, would the Catholic Church be cool with you just being able to pray by yourself? No, because if you can just do it yourself, what do you need the church for? So they set up the Inquisition to find and punish heretics. And they could do anything to a person except draw blood. So let's say that I think that Xavier is a heretic. And I say, Xavier's a heretic. Xavier says, no, I'm not. I'm a good Christian man. And I get a real sharp piece of metal and I get it burning hot. And then I burn Xavier's skin. Will Xavier bleed? No, he won't bleed. But if I burned him, would he admit that maybe he is a heretic? Thank you, Noah. You're the only person in this class with me, and I appreciate that. But so the Inquisition basically could do whatever they wanted whenever they wanted. Because who was going to tell on them? They're the church. So the Inquisition would find and kill people. And let's say, thank you for coming back online, everyone. Let's say that they did convict you of being a heretic or being a witch. What if I have, Kezia smart and Kezia doesn't want to do what her husband says because she's smarter than her husband? Well, her husband can just be like, she's a witch. And the Inquisition could find her guilty and burn her at the stake. And so it was all of these things that the church was doing. Martin Luther said that is not right. And he writes his lists. And that's when the Protestant Reformation begins. Protestant comes from the word protest. Does anybody know what the word protest means? Aaron?
To fight against something.
Yeah.
Like how Martin Luther King protested against. Yeah.
Against civil injustices, right? It means to say something is wrong. Does anybody know what the word reform means? Does anybody know what reform means? Reform means to fix. So the idea is, if Mr. Frazier is a thief and I am stealing a bunch of stuff, then they send me to prison to reform so that when I get out, I don't steal stuff anymore. So the Protestant Reformation, this is the last thing, and then I'm going to let you go. The Protestant Reformation is Martin Luther was protesting the wrong things about the church, and he wanted to reform, make the church what Jesus wanted it to be, right? When Jesus says spread the gospel, he didn't mean at a gunpoint, be a Christian or I'll kill you. So Martin Luther wants to fix the church. But that is not how the Catholic Church sees it. They see it as an attack. And so we're going to see in England on Monday and in other countries, some countries go Protestant and go away from the church, and some countries stay Catholic and fight the Protestants. Did that make sense more or less? All right, cool. You guys can go back to Miss Alanise's class. Thank you for bearing with me. I will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend. If you didn't do your science test, do your science test, please. You can just take a picture of it if you want and send it to me.